Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the chief underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now, here's your host, Dr. W.F. Strong.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Good Books Radio. I'm your host, Dr. W.F. Strong, and I want to thank our underwriter, Audiobooks.com, for sponsoring this program. Today, we will be talking to Arturo Longoria, who is a naturalist, and his book is called The Sand Sheet. Arturo lives in South Texas and is a renowned expert on the flora and fauna of South Texas. And he's written a number of wonderful books, award-winning books, Adios to the Brushlands, Keepers of the Wilderness. I think of him as a kind of Thoreau of mesquite. He lives out in cabins that he has built in the brushlands, and he is really close to the land. And this is what makes him really fascinating, is he knows how to live off of the land. He knows what's edible and what's not and what's poisonous. He knows how to get along with the dangerous creatures, rattlesnakes, coral snakes, etc. And he knows a great deal about the recent history and ancient history of this area north of the Rio Grande Valley and south of Corpus Christi, called The Sand Sheet. His book is published by Texas A&M University Press, and he's on the phone now, so let's talk to him. Let's see, Arturo, can you tell me what the sand sheet is? I grew up in this region myself, and I remember, working on farms and some ranches where there was a lot of sandy soil in Brooks County. And is that part of this sand sheet, sandy soil?
Yes. Yeah, Brooks County is probably the epicenter of the sand sheet. Almost the entire county is covered with this aeolian sand. And what this is, the sand sheet, is a Holocene phenomenon. In other words, it began at the end of the last ice age, the Pleistocene. And it's a 2.2 million acres, thereabouts, of aeolian sand, or wind-driven sand. Mm-hmm. And it started about 10,000 to 11,000 years ago. Of course, it took several thousand years to creep all the way across this little inlet there at Zapata County, which is about 150 miles inland. But the interesting thing about the sand sheet is that it's larger than the sizes of Delaware and Rhode Island combined. Mm. So it has no surface water. It's if you try to cross it, particularly in the hot months, South Texas has incredibly hot weather in the summer. It's temperatures into the hundreds. You're going to die, and that's the primary reason. And that the people who try to cross, what I call them the long distance travelers, who try to cross during those months, late spring through the summer into early fall, invariably don't make it. And they find hundreds of bodies. And, of course, for every body they find, there's estimated maybe up to 10 they don't find. Wow. The people who just succumb to the heat, lack of water, and they perish in this desert, so to speak.
And this is right now during the last few years, particularly as we've had a kind of increase in illegal immigration coming out of Mexico. They try to cross this desert, although it doesn't really look like a desert to most of us, but you classify it as one, right?
Well, that's what the people in Mexico and Central America call it. Uh-huh. El desierto de Sur Texas, the South Texas desert. Uh-huh. But it's not a true desert. Yeah. The rainfall is just a little bit more than what would constitute a desert. Right. But it is all sand. There are motts, or little aggregations of woody plants here and there. Most of it is grassland in between. In effect, the sand sheet is an ecological area that is trying to be reclaimed by the plants around it. And these plants were originally native to what's underneath the sand now, but the sand came and covered it all up.
Was this once underwater? Was this once under the Gulf of
Mexico?
Underwater. Never underwater. No. It's just that the winds pushed the sands?
Yes. 12,000 years ago, 14,000 years ago, the sea shelf stretched out between 75 and 125 miles farther out than it does now.
Okay.
So because of the ice age, and when the ice began to retreat north, it changed the salinity of the oceans, and wind currents changed somewhat, and the prevailing southeasterly winds that we have here in South Texas, that's when that more or less really started with gusto and started to blow the sand off the sea shelf inland. There were bays, like, for example, the Rio Grande has no bay. One of the reasons for that is because the sand pretty much covered everything up. There were streams, there were little arroyos, there were all kinds of things, and there were actually people living in this area 14,000 years ago. But as the sand began to invade inland, of course, it chased them out, and it became a no man's land.
And these sands, back in that time, they were like huge dunes. They look like you might find at white sands in New Mexico.
Yes, there were huge dunes, but most of those huge dunes were closer to the coast.
Mm-hmm.
But as it came inland, the dunes began to disappear. Having said that, within 9 miles of where I'm at now, there's a monster dune that's still there, and that dune is slowly migrating across the land.
Huh.
The interesting thing is that as that dune migrates, it scrapes the land beneath it, so you can walk behind that dune, and you can look at soil that's been covered up for 12,000 years, or at least 6,000 years in this area. And so you find all these lateral points and things like that from the people that lived here in this area 12,000 years ago. It's remarkable.
And you live at the edge of the sand sheet, right?
I live at the edge of the sand sheet.
In a cabin.
In a cabin in the woods.
So that's you're right. The
Edward, with a cell phone.
You're the Edward Abbey of mesquite.
Yeah, more or less, I guess.
Well, I mean, you have a lot of the similarities because of the other books you've written, Adios to the Brushlands. Do you consider yourself a naturalist like Muir, or how do you think of yourself?
I think of myself as someone who advocates for the land.
Okay.
Today, there seems to be this assault on the land. And when I say the land, I'm speaking holistically, the water, the air, everything. So I advocate for the land. Some years ago, I had a lady come down from one of the universities, I think it was in Vermont somewhere, and we were talking about the ecology of the region. And in the course of a conversation, she said something about the people that crossed over from Mexico and Central America, they were the victims. They were victims. Mm-hmm. And I said, no, they're not the victims. The victims are the bobcats and the coyotes and the raccoons and the trees and all the herbaceous plants that get mowed down, get torn up, got trashed out. The animals get poisoned by the refuse that's left behind. I said, those are the true victims. And I said, well, I advocate for those who have no voice. Mm-hmm. They can't speak for themselves. Everybody else has a voice. So I advocate for the animals, for the plants, for the land. Mm-hmm. So that's how I describe myself.
So it's interesting that you live out in the country, out in the woods, and yet you see a lot more of the illegal immigration than those of us who live in the cities ever are aware of. They pass through you. You see the trash they leave behind. You see the struggle that they have to cross the land without dying. Do you ever give them water for send them on their way, or you always discourage them from attempting it?
No, I always feed them and give them water.
Mm-hmm.
Always. First thing I ask is, are you thirsty? Yes,
mm-hmm.
Well, they're always thirsty. So we bring out water for them, and we sit them down, and then we feed them. And even the ones that are MS-13 gang members, they give you these looks like, yeah, we'd cut your throat if we had a chance.
Mm-hmm.
That's rare, but we always feed them. We always give them water, and then a lot of them are actually people who have been abandoned by the coyotes, the
mm-hmm.
smugglers.
Right.
And so they understand how dangerous it is.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them just want us to call the Border Patrol. Those that are coming through and have been abandoned, I tell them, look, you're not going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to make it. I try to talk them out of it. and I start the sand sheet off with a story about this young 19-year-old fellow who's from El Salvador, and he was crying and he was panicked and everything. He had been abandoned. He was completely lost. He didn't know where he was. He wanted to go to New York City. He had no idea how far away New York City was. And I just saw this kid, and I thought, oh, my God, he's not going to make it. Mm-hmm. He'll be dead within 24 hours.
Well, he's the one who told you that the lights on the horizon were Houston, right?
Yes, the smugglers. There's a recharge station because there is oil and gas drilling in this area. And off in the distance, we see this glow at night, mm-hmm. and that's that little recharge station. And the smugglers will tell them, you see that glow out there? That's Houston. Oh, well, just imagine somebody coming from Honduras or El Salvador. They had no idea. Mm. So I set him straight on that. And unfortunately, he of course, he was in bad shape. Mm-hmm. So I fed him and gave him water and tried to get him to relax. And finally, he just realized that he would not make it. And so we called the Border Patrol for him. I've often wondered what happened to him, where he is. I hope he's doing well now. He would be, I think, 25 years old now, and I hope he's okay, because there's a connection that's made. Mm-hmm. It's not just some abstraction you see on the news. Well, so many came through, so many died, so on and so forth. I mean, when you're actually dealing with them, you realize, no, these are people, and for better or worse, they're going to try to make it, and very, very few of them make it on their own. They don't make it. They die.
Well, you are an expert on the land and what can be eaten, what plants can be eaten, etc. Could you make it?
I just turned 68 here last December. Mm-hmm. I don't know now that I could. Yeah, I you have to have water, regardless mm-hmm. of how much of an expert somebody is in survival or bushcraft or that sort of thing. You have to have water. That's the primary thing. And you have to cross about 60 miles of desert going north directly. And again, I'm using that term loosely, right. Going north from here. There is no drinking water. If there are wells, they're going to be salty, very salty, and they're just for cattle.
For cattle, right.
But there is no. It just rained 2.5 inches here day before yesterday. Within 15 minutes of the rain, it looked like there had been no rain. Yeah. Everything will turn green, but there are no puddles. There's nothing. The sand soaks it up immediately.
Well, this area, the sand sheet, at least a part of it used to be called the Wild Horse Desert.
Well, that's in geological or anthropological terms, I would assume that's a rather new term, and it's a term that would be used only, of course, once the horses arrived, once the Europeans arrived, one, and two, only when they started to dig artificial wells, because a horse could not have survived out here.
Yeah, that's why I was asking.
Some kind of water source.
That's why I was asking, because there's in General Grant's diary when he was coming down to fight the Mexican-American War in 1845 or so. He recorded in his journal seeing all the wild horses out there south of Corpus Christi, so not all the way down, maybe to the true sand sheet. But the other thing I was going to ask you is there's a lot of mesquite, of course, out in this region now, but from what I understand, there was a time where there wasn't much mesquite. It was more grasslands.
Well, that's a big misconception. I mean, that's kind of become a political thing. The people who want grazing land, who want range land, want to tell you that there was grass. But the fact is that the sand sheet is only about, as I said, only about 10,000 years old. And the plants on the either side are trying to reclaim the life on the sand sheet. And these are known as seral stages or succession. So if you clear an area, the first thing that's going to show up are little herbaceous plants and then maybe some grasses and whatnot. But as it matures, you're going to see larger and larger and larger plants. So we're at the stage here at the sand sheet where it's a lot of motts, and the motts are the main areas of reclamation, where the hardwoods are trying to take hold, and they are taking hold.
Mm-hmm.
But in between, it's grasses and herbaceous shrubs.
Mm-hmm.
In another 5,000-6,000 years, you're not going to see that. Remember this too, that energy flows through systems, and energy, and so in order to flow freely and more positively, it needs a diverse system. So nature seeks diversity.
Mm-hmm.
So when people say, well, it's all grass, it was just all grass, well, that's not the best fashion, the best form for nature to pass through a system. So it's going to want to become more diverse. So mesquite was here 50,000 years ago. What's become invasive here on the sand sheet is the sand itself. The sand came in and covered everything up. So things are trying to reclaim this area.
Hmm.
So I think that's kind of anthropocentric when people say it was always grass. So blah, blah, this, that, and the other. It's been grass for several thousand years now, but that's just the slow process of reclaiming the land, of succession, the several stages, and of energy as it moves through ecosystems. So
I like that you say when people come to visit you, you say they're troubled that you let the brush, so to speak, grow up close to your house. You let nature have its way, and that troubles them.
Well, people come from the cities, and of course they like everything manicured.
Uh-huh.
And so the two things that the biggest complaints, some people, by the way, love it out here, but the biggest complaints from people who come from the cities is, one, it's too quiet. It's just too quiet. It makes them very nervous. And the other one is that I don't clear everything.
Mm.
I do have a little cleared front yard and a little cleared backyard. Actually, the backyard was cleared. It was naturally like that because I have some large motts around me, and that's just a little open area, and we keep that mowed. But for the most part, I want nature close to me. That's just the beauty of life, is to be able to have nature close and be part of it, not to hold it at bay and not to necessarily objectify it, but to become subjective with nature. And so, yeah, I love it like that. I have everything around me. I should add how the other thing is that the main key species of plant in this part of the sand sheet is what's known as granjeno. That's Celtis pallida, and it's related to the elm, and it's the the key species that once the herbaceous shrubs have allowed other animals to come in, like birds and coyotes and whatnot, then the granjeno, because it clumps, is the one that starts, and that brings in everything else, like the mesquite, the ebony, there's a plant called lotebush, it's ziziphus, and then the other one that's very common, it's a beautiful plant, it's called brasil, with an S, brasil, and that's Condalia hookeri. So, and that's got a very hard wood. It's got a specific gravity of 1.0, 1.4, extremely hard wood. It's a beautiful evergreen. So those are the main plants. There's not a lot of diversity in terms of the hardwoods yet. But if I go south,
What about the Palo Verde tree? Do we have that here? I know
we have it, but I have not seen any Palo Verde on the sand sheet.
On the sand sheet, okay.
In the transition zones, yes, and and that tells me that that's what's moving in. I can go south a few hundred yards, and I start to enter the transition zones, and that's where I see other species. I'll see coma, Palo Verde, a plant called Coberlinia spinosa, which is kind of a mass of thorns. It's ultra green. Guayacan, all kinds of different kinds of cacti. So that's just right south, and I can walk to it. And so it's really interesting to note the sand sheet proper, and then the transition zones. A lot of people mistake the two. I had a geologist out here, and he thought the transition zone was the actual sand sheet. And I told him, no, this is not the sand sheet. We had to go a little bit farther north, and then when you get there, you'll realize. And we walked out there, and he said, "Oh yeah, okay, I see the difference." So.
And how far from your house must you walk to get to the authentic beginning of the sand sheet?
About 10 feet.
Oh, really? so about 5 seconds you can get there easy.
Yeah, right?
Well, one of the things in the book that you talk about is how, nature can be dangerous. You went out and you got bitten up by ticks, and this was the beginning of a problem.
Yes, a few years ago, I was out bird watching, and I stepped into a nest of seed ticks. They're tiny, tiny, tiny little ticks. That along the border, they're called pinolillos. And I didn't realize I had them on me for several hours. And then about the middle of the night, I woke up, and my calves were itching.
Oh, no.
And so my wife came in, and she at first couldn't just saw that everything was red. It took about 3.5 hours. There were maybe several hundred on each leg.
Oh, my.
And that triggered a genetic marker I did not know I had. It's not common in the United States. It's really only found in Europe. It's found in northern Italy, Austria, Switzerland, and Germany. And so that triggered that genetic marker, and I became very, very, very ill. And I talk about it in the book. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I dedicate the book to my doctor in San Antonio, who saved my life, because I was placed on the Texas liver transplant list. And because he was able to identify what was going on and knew how to not cure it, but at least stabilize the situation so that my liver enzymes came back to normal, my bilirubin came back to normal, and everything. So I dedicate the book to him. But I was very, very ill. I mean, very ill, probably getting ready to die. So,
and this was from these ticks that damaged your liver. The ticks damaged your liver?
The ticks, it's an autoimmune disease. So in other words, what the ticks did was they turned on that marker. Uh-huh. So my body started to attack itself. Uh-huh. And so the ticks were just a trigger, a catalyst, so to speak. And of course, I didn't know I had it. And it was nasty. I was yellow as can be. So
yeah, I know in the book you said it was just a matter of hours before someone came up to you and said, "Your eyes are really yellow."
Yeah, right.
That'll wake you up.
Scary. Yeah, that was a scary time. All the tests I had to go through, procedures and everything, and I'll have to take medicines for the rest of my life, just to immune suppressant medicines to. But
even as we talk, you're back out in the woods. You're sitting in the woods talking to me.
Can't keep me out of the woods, Bill.
So well, what do you do now to protect yourself now that you know you have this issue?
Well, my doctor tells me I need to stay away from movie theaters and crowded malls and that sort of thing. I don't necessarily obey that. I go to places and whatnot, but at the same time, I have gotten the flu a couple of times or 3 times over the years, and I always end up in the hospital. So, I'm cautious now.
Very cautious.
I'm really cautious. But it's a good excuse for me because I'd rather be in the woods anyway. So I'm not complaining.
And what do you do about protecting yourself about another tick infestation? Do you wear some sort of insecticide on your ankles, or what do you do?
Sometimes I'll spread. Fortunately, out here at the Sand Sheet, we don't have a lot of ticks. That's more along the Rio Grande. Uh-huh. But I am careful, and I'm always checking myself. I wear light colored pants, which so I could spot something, and sometimes I'll spray some insect repellent, but. For the most part, I just go through my life, just do what I want to do, and I'm feeling well, and I walk a lot. I have a blog called Woods Roamer, and it's basically just the title follows who I am, what I do. I love to roam the woods.
Yeah, I was just
And
looking
I
at
loved
one
it.
of your blog posts where you have a video of how to use a machete.
Oh yeah, well that's Amador. He's a friend of mine, and I noted how he was using his machete with a gancho or a hook, and he was working the two together. So I asked him, let me videotape this, and I put it on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
That's been some years ago. But the blog is just a regular blog. It's and I think it's called Woods Roamer, The Woods Roamer,
Mm-hmm.
and it's mainly about native plants. It's also about bushcraft. I make my own self bows. I'm not a hunter, but I like to make bows because I wanted to know, and I write about this in Sand Sheet a lot. I wanted to know what the people of this region, the Bahuitecan geographical region, were using to make their bows, because the historical literature, when I read it, I said, this is inaccurate. This cannot be accurate. So the only way to find out is to replicate the bows, and figuring if it works for me, it worked for them, 6, 7, 8,000 years ago. And so I started using every kind of wood you can imagine, and testing specific gravities, compression, tension, everything else. And I finally came up with what I know what they use now, because I know what works best, and I've made hundreds and hundreds of bows. So that's one of my great fascinations is the primitive cultures and the primitive technologies.
And is that bow smaller by a good deal than what we think of when we think of a store-bought bow?
Well, it's the long bow, for example, or the European flat bow. Those are about 6 feet long. Uh-huh. These bows are a little less than 5 feet long, and they'll range anywhere from about 52 inches to maybe 58 inches. The people who hunted back then stayed close to the riparian areas, and that's very, very thick foliage. And so, they wanted a shorter bow. They would probably get up in trees or along little game trails. But they're very powerful bows. They'll have a pull of about anywhere between 40 and 55 pounds. So
I was thinking of the San Bushmen in Africa. Their bows are
no, it's
only
not a
about
little
3
bitty, tiny
feet.
bow like that.
But they use poison arrows too.
They use poison arrows. No, and I also researched the use of asphaltum, which is a natural kind of oily, tarry goo that comes off the floor of the Gulf of Mexico.
Right.
And the Indians here would trade for that, and it's found along the beach.
But what would they do with it? What would they do with the tar?
They would use that to attach their arrow points. They would also put that along the shaft where the feathers are going to be attached to help attach that. It's the South Texas way of doing pine, pitch, or birch tar. Well, they used asphaltum instead.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've learned a lot. I need to come see you because I want to learn about the edible berries that grow here in South Texas. And I know there are some from my childhood, because I just, trial and error. But
that's
it's
dangerous.
Yes. But it's much better to have someone to say, yeah, this is a good one. Don't touch that one.
Well, Bill, you're welcome anytime. Just let me know, and it's getting to be a good time of the year to go out botanizing, and particularly if you're interested in edible and medicinal plants. So we can just go along and I'll show you everything, and I'll also show you how to do other things too, like to make cordage out of agave and yucca and out of other plants that we can make cordage from, and other little tools and whatnot. We'll carve out a couple of spoons too. That's always a good thing to know how to do.
Yeah, that's cool. In case I ever get lost out there by accident, right?
Don't get lost. Take lots of water.
All right, buddy. Good talking to you.
Okay.
And I'll see you soon.
I look forward to it.
Okay.
Take care.
We've been talking with Arturo Longoria about his new book, The Sand Sheet, published by Texas A&M University Press. It is a wonderful read. There's a lot of good information about the geography of South Texas and the flora and fauna, but it also has a great deal to say about modern immigration of man across this very dangerous desert. So you'll want to pick this up, The Sand Sheet by Arturo Longoria. For Good Books Radio, I've been your host today, Dr. W.F. Strong. Here's hoping that all your books are good reads.